All right, let's jump right in. We're looking at a source today that makes this, well, just a massive claim. It says that one single event from 2,000 years ago is the most important thing that has ever happened in all of history. So, how on earth does it back that up? Let's find out.
I mean, think about that for a second. Can one single thing happening in one city on one day really change everything, the entire world? You know, it sounds pretty far-fetched, but history actually has some interesting things to say about that.
So, the source we're digging into brings up a perfect example. June 28, 1914. You've got this 19-year-old who assassinates Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. And what seemed like just a local political act, well, it turned out to be the spark that lit a global fuse. It was like a domino effect. Because of all these complex alliances, within just a few weeks, nation after nation gets pulled into what we now know as World War I. It's crazy to think about, right? One action, one event, and the whole world is changed forever.
Okay, so that historical example really sets the stage for the source's main point. It's basically saying, hey, just like that assassination, there was another event that had even bigger, more world-shattering consequences. And here it is, the big claim. The crucifixion of Jesus is the single most important event in all of human history. Not just back then, but an event that, according to this source, is still changing things right now, today. So, how do you even begin to back up a claim that big? Well, the source breaks it down for us. It argues that this one event accomplished three very specific, very powerful things that changed everything.
All right, first up, the source argues that the cross wasn't random at all. It was specifically designed to show us the true cost, the real weight of what the Bible calls sin.
And to really hammer this point home, the source connects some dots, going way back to an ancient story in the book of Genesis. So you have Abraham, who's told to sacrifice his one and only son Isaac, and Isaac has to carry the wood for his own sacrifice up a mountain. Now, you fast forward centuries. The Gospels tell us God sacrifices his one and only son Jesus, who carries his own wooden cross, up what the source says is the very same location. The whole point here is that this isn't some wild coincidence. No, it's presented as a carefully planned foreshadowing, a picture of what was to come.
You know, the timing of all this is also presented as being incredibly important. According to the source, this didn't just happen at some random point in history. No, it happened at the exact time the Roman Empire was using crucifixion, which is, just about the most brutal, agonizing form of punishment anyone has ever come up with.
So you have to ask, why? Why something so extreme, so awful? Well, from the source's perspective, it's because sin isn't just a little mistake or a minor slip-up. It's defined as spiritual treason. Think about it like this. It's a full-on rebellion against the king of the universe. So in that light, the punishment had to be just as severe as the crime was seen to be.
But here's a twist. The story doesn't just end with all that pain and suffering. The source points us to this verse in Hebrews that talks about how Jesus endured the cross for the joy that was set before him. Joy? How does that even work? Well, the source explains that the joy was the end goal, fixing that broken relationship between people and God. The pain, as intense as it was, had a massive purpose.
Okay, so that was the first big idea. The second major point the source makes is that the cross wasn't just about wiping the slate clean from the past. It was also about building something totally new, the foundation for a completely different kind of family.
If you zoom in on the scene of the crucifixion itself, the source highlights this really stark contrast between two groups of people. On one hand, you've got the soldiers. They're just completely indifferent, callous. They're literally gambling for Jesus' clothes while he's dying, totally focused on what they can get for themselves. But then on the other hand, you have his followers, people like his mother Mary. They're right there, present in his suffering, and their focus is entirely on him.
And right in the middle of all that agony, something really pivotal happens. Jesus looks down, sees his mom, and he puts her in the care of his disciple, John. Now, what's so significant about that? Well, the source points out that he didn't give it to his own biological brothers, because at that point, they weren't believers. This is a huge deal. The priority is visibly shifting right then and there, from family by blood to family by faith.
And this action wasn't out of the blue. The source connects it directly to something Jesus had taught earlier. The argument is that the cross basically cements this idea into reality. A new kind of family, a spiritual one, is officially being born. It's a family that's not held together by DNA, but by a shared faith in God. And part of the deal is that this new community is now responsible for each other.
And that brings us to the climax of the whole event. Now, the way the source lays it out, these final moments aren't a story of defeat at all.
Instead, it's presented as a totally controlled, even triumphant, ending.
The sequence of events right at the end is absolutely crucial here. First, to fulfill an old prophecy, he says, "I thirst," showing he's fully human. But then, after he gets a drink, he's the one who chooses the exact moment to act. He isn't just passively fading away. The source makes it super clear that he's in control. He says what needs to be said, and then, get this, he chooses to give up his spirit. It's framed as a willful act of surrender, not just his body giving out on him.
And what does he say in that final moment? Just 3 words. It is finished. But according to the source, you shouldn't hear that as a sigh of relief, like, "Phew, it's finally over." No, this is framed as a shout of victory, a declaration that the mission is accomplished.
So, finished? What's finished? Well, according to this interpretation, it's everything. The entire debt of sin, paid in full. The job of reconciling humanity with God, done, complete. This one act is presented as covering the sins of everyone who believes, whether they lived in the past, are alive now, or will live in the future. The work is totally, completely finished. Nothing else has to be added.
Okay, so that's the heavy theological stuff, right? But the source is really, really clear on this point. This isn't just some dusty old story. The argument is that this event has direct, practical, real-world consequences for how we live our lives right now, today.
So, let's boil it all down. What are the big takeaways here? First, because that debt is paid, complete forgiveness is on the table. Second, that broken relationship with God can be made whole again, which means freedom from all the guilt and shame. And finally, it makes you part of that new spiritual family we talked about, a community where everyone is responsible for looking out for each other.
And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. The source kicked things off by showing how one assassination in 1914 could ripple out and change the whole world. And it wraps up by arguing that this one event from 2,000 years ago has the exact same power, but on a personal level, to change a single life today. So, it leaves us all with a pretty big question to think about. What do you think? Can it?